It's 7 o'clock. I'm Dermot Manahan. This is Sky News Tonight. The top story, more concern for the Queen's health. Buckingham Palace announces that Her Majesty will not attend tomorrow's state opening of Parliament, the first time for almost 60 years. We'll get all the latest reaction to that story throughout the evening. Also tonight, Victory Day in Russia, but no end in sight for the war in Ukraine. President Putin fails to reveal his next move as the advance of Russian troops halts and claims it is Russia that is under threat.
In these days, you are fighting for our people in Donbass, for the safety of our motherland, Russia.
But in Moscow, as Russia marks the defeat of Nazism, the defense secretary here claims Putin and his subordinates are no better.
Through their invasion of Ukraine, Putin, his inner circle and his generals are now mirroring fascism and tyranny of 77 years ago.
This place is being shelled continuously, but still they come out to bring in supplies of food, water and medicine.
Plus, we'll have a special report from Donbass in the east, where fighting and bombing continues, but so does the mission to help those left behind. A very good evening. The President of Russia probably once thought that today would look very different. Victory Day is the occasion on which Russians celebrate the defeat of Nazism in Europe. But victory for Vladimir Putin in Ukraine is still far from sight. His forces have stuttered to an embarrassing halt. The Western world has closed ranks, turning Russia into a pariah state, and he will no doubt be considering his next move. Well, coming up over the next hour, we'll have analysis of Russia's progress or lack of it in Ukraine, speak to a panel of people who've been closely following the situation, and get the view from Moscow from one of its United Nations diplomats. But first, let's give you a quick rundown of the day's other main developments. And it is the breaking news that Her Majesty the Queen will not attend the state opening of Parliament tomorrow. Well, our royal commentator, Alistair Bruce, joins me now. And Alistair, no doubt this will be a decision that's been taken very reluctantly and given the lateness of the announcement.
I think it must be very aggravating for the Queen to have to face this mobility issue that she has, because for her, the constitutional duty of opening Parliament as sovereign at the start of every session has always been very important. But they made many plans at the House of Lords to try and make sure it was as easy as possible for the Queen to be brought close to where she was to read the speech. But I imagine that she's taken a decision with the advice of her doctors tonight to not do it tomorrow. And she's signed letters patent to enable, according to the best legal advice that comes from the Clerk of the Parliaments in the Lords, for the Prince of Wales to read it for her. So in a way, everything is done perfectly normally, but the Queen won't be with us.
And what about previous occasions that she has missed it some time ago?
That's right. But I think what we should remember is that every time Parliament is prorogued, and we learned a lot about that during this Parliament, or dissolved, the Queen's speech is read for her by commissioners, a row of lords or those representatives appointed by the Queen who then read her speech out. So in essence, it's very rare in history that monarchs have always turned up. Queen Victoria, in the latter part of her reign, hardly ever went to Parliament. But the Queen has been very, very strict on herself to try and attend every opening of each session. It's just that on this occasion, she is unable to do so, and it will be a real aggravation for her, I'm sure.
Yes, and it's these episodic mobility issues that seem to be the problem, Alistair.
Yes, I think that, my mother is a similar age, and it's not always clear to her at the start of each day what she's going to be able to do. And I think the Queen probably recognises that this is a huge role for anybody, let alone her, to go and sit before the combined Houses of Lords and Commons in Parliament, watched by the world, and to read out an 8.5-minute speech. She's 96, and I dare say that on the advice of her doctors, despite the fact that I expect she wanted to go, just the thought of having to take that on is now removed from her shoulders. And after all, that's what the Prince of Wales can do for her, and it's what the structure and constitution enables. It'll be sad not to have her present, but the crown will be there, and in essence, it is in the name of the crown that the Prince of Wales will do it.
OK, thanks for explaining. Alistair, good to talk to you. Alistair Bruce, our royal commentator there. Well, let's get more on this now with our correspondent, Laura Bundock, who joins us. And, Laura, what precisely has Buckingham Palace said?
Well, they've issued a brief statement explaining why this decision was taken and why it was taken at such short notice as well, which I can now read to you. It says the Queen continues to experience episodic mobility problems and in consultation with her doctors has reluctantly decided that she will not attend the state opening of Parliament tomorrow. At Her Majesty's request and with the agreement of the relevant authorities, the Prince of Wales will read the Queen's speech on Her Majesty's behalf, with the Duke of Cambridge also in attendance. And of course, as Alistair Bruce was saying there, this is the Queen's principal constitutional duty. And I think it will be reluctantly and with great sadness that she has had to take this decision not to attend the state opening of Parliament. But I think given her age, given that she is 96, no one will criticise her for taking this decision, given the amount of there's a spotlight that she's under and the distances she has to walk. As Alistair was saying, even with cars being moved so they can be closer to doors, there are steps where she has to walk up to take her seat. And so no doubt these were part of the problems. But we're told and we understand that Her Majesty is carrying out other engagements this week. She spoke to the Australian Prime Minister today. So no sign of her duties slowing down virtually or by the phone, just in person. These mobility issues are obviously still troubling her.
OK, Laura, many thanks. Laura Bundock there. Well, now to politics. And Sir Keir Starmer has said that he will resign as the Labour leader if police decide that he broke lockdown rules and issue him with a fixed penalty notice. An investigation is taking place into whether Sir Keir and others breached restrictions when he had a beer and a takeaway curry with Labour activists in Durham in April last year. Sir Keir says he's absolutely clear that no rules were broken and this is a matter of principle and honour for him.
I had to isolate 6 times during COVID, pulling me away from my work and the things that I love. But I did it because we followed the rules. The idea that I would then casually break those rules is wrong. And frankly, I don't believe those accusing me believe it themselves. They are just trying to feed cynicism, to get the public to believe all politicians are the same. I'm here to say that they're not. I believe in honour, integrity, and the principle that those who make the laws must follow them.
Northern Ireland's First Minister-elect has said the Northern Ireland Protocol must not be used to hold the province to ransom. Sinn Féin's Vice President, Michelle O'Neill, was speaking after her party became the largest in the Northern Ireland Assembly for the first time. And I should just warn you, the footage of her delivering her statement contains flash photography.
As Democrats, the DUP, but also the British government, must accept and respect the democratic outcome of this election. Brinkmanship will not be tolerated where the north of Ireland becomes collateral damage in a game of chicken with the European Commission. The responsibility for finding solutions to the protocol to make its smooth implementation lie with Boris Johnson and the EU. But make no mistake, we and our business community here will not be held to ransom.
OK, let's return now to the Victory Day parade through Red Square today. The usually ostentatious display, while still a spectacle, was pared down this year despite the blue skies over Moscow. A military flypast was cancelled at the last minute. And one of President Putin's top generals, General Gerasimov, was conspicuously absent. There was no new announcement from Vladimir Putin about what he might do next in Ukraine. Some had expected perhaps the mobilisation of Russia's reserve forces or a further declaration about the scale of the conflict. Instead, President Putin used the occasion to blame the West for his bloody war in Ukraine. Our Moscow correspondent, Diana Magnay, was there and has this report.
Shaking hands with the veterans. A salute from his defence minister Sergei Shoigu. before taking to the podium to honour Russia's servicemen, to stress Russian exceptionalism and to deliver another rebuke to the West, who he says forced him to move into Ukraine.
Мы видели, как разворачивается военная инфраструктура, как начали работать сотни зарубежных советников, шли регулярные поставки самого современного оружия из стран НАТО. Опасность росла с каждым днем. Россия дала упреждающий отпор агрессии. Это было вынужденное, своевременное и единственно правильное решение.
Snipers as ever guarding the scene as the tanks rolled through Red Square. The commander-in-chief looking on, a blanket on his lap and his face hard to read as his troops yelled their support. In the absence of any actual victory on the battleground, this was really all that Vladimir Putin could do, claim the moral high ground that this is all about defending the motherland, whilst showing off his nuclear arsenal while he's at it. No flyover this year because of the rain, but the spectators still loved it. The message that Russia here is blameless hitting home.
Наша позиция всегда это русско-национальная, открытая душа. Мы рады всем, но кто к нам с мечом приходит, тот от меча и страдает.
Vladimir Putin has elevated the Soviet victory in World War II to almost cult status during his 22 years in power. The hard-fought but eventual victory, the Nazi threat, motifs of his rhetoric now around Ukraine, harking back to the sacrifice of his Soviet forebears. And in Poland, where Russia's ambassador tried to lay a wreath in memory, protesters threw red paint and chanted fascist at him. A sight which won't go down well back home. Russians in their millions march each year to commemorate their fathers and grandfathers. Vladimir Putin leading the way with a portrait of his father. Huge crowds to honour the 27 million who fought and died in what's known here as the Great Patriotic War.
Мы гордимся своими воинами, которые освобождают наш русский народ на сегодня. То есть в мирное время у нас идет война, и то есть мы за наших воинов, мы их, в общем-то, поддерживаем и очень гордимся ими.
Stay a few years in Russia and you'll recognise the patriotic songs. But we were surprised to hear this one, sung in Ukrainian by a man whose mother lives outside Kharkiv, who prefer relations to be as they were in Soviet times.
Нас разделили. У меня с той стороны родня, и если их призовут в армию, они что, будут стрелять в своего родственника, родного дядю, в родного там брата? Нет, конечно. Вот. Мы один народ. Мы не должны воевать. Вот и все.
His mother just wants to plant potatoes, he says. Keep ducks to eat them in winter. She just wants peace. But that might be a long time coming. And at what cost this time round? And how will history judge the Russian people a few decades from now?
And Diana joins me now live. So, Dan, as you described there, plenty of pride, honour and patriotism in that speech, but no escalation.
No, and perhaps he doesn't have the capabilities to escalate or the desire to de-escalate. But also remember that Victory Day, unless you have a victory to declare, is really a very important day in the Russian holiday, in the Russian calendar, and a day when you just want to make the Russian people happy. So you were saying in the lead into that piece that there were rumours that he would decide to actually declare war, because at the moment it's just called a special military operation, and that mobilisation might then be called. I don't think those things are off the table, but they're not really something that he would likely do on Victory Day. He can do them any other time, but not on a day when he's trying to make people happy. And those mobilisation rumours haven't gone away, by the way. There are still reports from sort of various individuals that people have been brought in, that they've had to submit personal details in expectation of a possible call-up. So those rumours are still there. Now, the other things you were talking about, the fact that there was no flyover this year, to be honest, I've covered about 5 or 6 of these victory parades. The weather was incredibly turbulent today, and they do cancel the flyovers when there is an expectation of rain and strong winds like we had today. As to the absence or not of Valery Gerasimov, that is quite interesting, but he is not the key figure that you see at these Victory Day parades. In any case, that is always Sergei Shoigu. There's also been speculation about his health over the past 2.5 months, but there he was in that limousine, as he also always is, balancing his way at the beginning of the parade, saluting his armed forces, and he was very much there. Valery Gerasimov was rumoured to have been injured and that he'd actually been deployed to Donbass, but in the days since that rumour began, he's also been pictured alongside Sergei Shoigu on state television. So, we still don't quite know why he wasn't there today, but he does seem to be back in Russia and certainly visible.
OK, Diana Magnay in Moscow, thank you very much. Well, meanwhile, the British Defence Secretary has said that Vladimir Putin is dishonouring Russian soldiers who fought to defeat the Nazis. He also called for Russian soldiers and army generals to face court-martials over the conflict in Ukraine.
Through their invasion of Ukraine, Putin, his inner circle and his generals are now mirroring fascism and tyranny of 77 years ago, repeating the errors of the last century's totalitarian regimes. They are showing the same disregard for human life, national sovereignty and the rules-based international system, the very system, not least the United Nations Charter itself, that we conceived together and for which we fought and were victorious together, in the hope of saving future generations from the scourge of war. Their unprovoked, illegal, senseless and self-defeating invasion of Ukraine, their attacks against innocent civilians and their homes, their widespread atrocities, including the deliberate targeting of women and children, they all corrupt the memory of past sacrifices and Russia's once proud global reputation. The response to this failure by the Russian forces on the ground in Ukraine has in itself been a disgraceful display of self-preservation, doubling down on failure, anger, dishonesty and scapegoating. The behaviour of the Russian General Staff has shown that their own self-preservation comes first. War crimes, targeting civilians and the casualty rates in their own battalion tactical groups are all secondary concerns. The truth is that Russia's General Staff are failing and they know it.
Ben Wallace there. Well, meanwhile, Russian forces have continued their assault on the east of Ukraine, continuing to destroy towns and villages. People living in the town of Avdiivka on the front line are now relying on volunteers for essential supplies as the Russians continue to advance. From their skies, Alex Rossi sent this report.
They are a lifeline to the people trapped by the fighting. As the sound of war bangs in the distance, Alexei Savkovich and his volunteers take essential supplies wherever they are needed.
There were 25,000-30,000, so many really evacuated, but some still stay here.
This town of Avdiivka has been fought over since 2014 and is smack in the path of Putin's army as Russia tries to conquer the Donbass. The first drop-off is an elderly man whose family now live in Russian-occupied territory. He is scared and all alone, but like many here, is too frail to leave. Strewn across the paths, there are fragments of bombs and rockets. The destruction has left this place without power and running water. But the fighting doesn't stop them loading the van with more supplies.
This is the Eastern District now.
Their drive taking them to the edges of this town and even nearer the fighting. As more bags are handed over, Tatiana tells me what the war has done to this community.
Боишься куда-то что-то идти. Надо на поселок сходить, я боюсь ходить. Никуда не выйти, ничего. Засвистело, попрятались. Ну вот как вы думаете, живем мы?
The delivery team go anywhere and everywhere despite the danger. Their next visit is even closer to the front line, and the handover is nerve-wracking.
Where did the shell land?
They don't enter this area, so...
It's okay? Okay. Well, there's something coming in then. It's quite close, but you can see how dangerous these deliveries are. But this is on the outskirts. There are still people here who can't leave, don't want to leave. Lots of different reasons, but this place is being shelled continuously. But still they come out to bring in supplies of food, water, and medicine. Let's go, guys.
When it feels safer, they move from cover and leave the area. But incredibly, the deliveries continue.
Sometimes when it shells over you, and you can feel somewhere closer. Yeah, there are some feeling when you need to lie, not to.
To keep your head down.
Yeah.
And then the delivery stopped for that day, and you try again another day.
No,
or you try that area again.
Yeah, we wait until when they send it's okay, it's safer, and continue.
On the last stop, we meet Valentina and her 6 grandchildren. In their childhood innocence, they seem oblivious to the war around them.
Это мы на квартире, это сейчас я сюда временно спрятались. Не надо. Там у нас другая квартира, там закрытая. Почему? Там сильно стреляют. А здесь, там девочки боятся.
Every week, civilians here are killed in the fighting. Alexei and his team know their work is dangerous, but so too is living on the front line, and without him, the suffering for many of these people would be even worse. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Eastern Ukraine.
And just to let you know, coming up at 9:30 tonight, we'll have a special programme with the stories of those forced to flee the fighting in Ukraine. And you're watching Sky News tonight. Coming up, The View from the Kremlin. I'll be speaking to Dmitry Polyanskiy, a Russian envoy to the United Nations.
I'm Becky Johnson, a Sky News Midlands correspondent based here in Birmingham. I remember seeing water pouring into people's homes and businesses as rivers burst their banks.
con eso ya podemos ir evaluando entonces cómo el cambio climático va a afectar estos ecosistemas. Y eso cómo afecta prácticamente toda la cadena. O sea, si afectamos a los productores primarios, que son las microalgas, vamos a ver afectado obviamente todo el resto de los organismos.
Now then, Vladimir Putin used his Victory Day speech today to accuse the West for causing Russia's invasion, blaming NATO expansion for forcing Russia into a defensive war, as he termed it, with Ukraine. Well, let's get more now on that view from the Kremlin. I'm joined now by Dmitry Polyanskiy, First Deputy Permanent Representative of Russia to the United Nations. And very good evening to you, Mr. Polyanskiy. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. May I start, first of all, with that characterisation by President Putin in his Victory Day speech, and I quote, he talks of NATO creating an absolutely unacceptable threat to us, causing Russia, he then said, to launch a preemptive strike in Ukraine. Nobody in the West recognises that scenario.
Hello, good evening. First of all, happy Victory Day to everybody. С Днем Победы. I would like to congratulate everybody who celebrates this day today. Well, you cited the words of my president, and I can tell you that it's obvious right now that we are now having the proxy war with NATO. So NATO is waging proxy war with Russia, not vice versa. But that's the reality that we face. And the documents that we discovered, the evidence that we discovered at the beginning of our special military operation, indicates with all clarity that there were concrete plans to strike on Russia from Ukraine. There were also concrete plans to strike on Donbass, and the documents of the Ukrainian General Staff that we discovered indicate this. So this was kind of a preemptive strike from Russia. We did it in full conformity with Article 51 of the UN Charter, and we notified the UN about it. OK, well,
as the president put it, it was a reaction to a build-up of armaments and special advisors in Ukraine. But as the world knows, as you all know, in Russia, the build-up, which started more than a year ago around the borders of Ukraine, was by Russian forces.
It was a reply. It was a responsive act to the buildup of Ukraine near the line of contact in Donbass, because there was about 100,000 Ukrainian troops ready to launch an attack in Donbass. And there were constant shellings, which have been continuing for 8 years, which the West ignored completely. That's why, of course, we had to be vigilant and we had to be on our alert. So, of course, this move was a reply to what Ukraine was trying to build up at the border. And you know that we made a lot of proposals to discuss the security guarantees to enter the negotiations with the US and NATO. It was absolutely rejected. The replies that we got were ridiculous, and they were not talking about the most important things that we were aiming at. And so there was at some point of time when Ukraine was already preparing to strike, and then when the attack started at Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, then we had no other way but to launch our strike.
OK, we're still trying to continue to understand that mindset. And just on the broad point about the NATO threat, now, NATO has never attempted to attack Russia in more than 70 years, going back through those fraught relations with the USSR, the Soviet Union. I notice you've got a small pin there with the hammer and sickle on from that era. Why? What is the Russian understanding of why NATO would want to attack now? It doesn't. It's a defensive organisation.
Well, it's not, and it was quite clear that NATO is not a defensive organization from the time of the war in Yugoslavia in the 1990s, Afghanistan, and there are a lot of other examples. NATO countries were behind the unconstitutional coup in Ukraine in 2014, which triggered all the problems that Ukraine is having since then. So, well, you can't say that NATO was physically attacking Russia. NATO is not physically attacking Russia right now. NATO is just supplying weapons, and which kill our soldiers and which kill civilian population as well. But NATO was, of course, behind all this turmoil. NATO was sending advisors. NATO was trying to embrace Ukraine, despite the fact that Russia was warning repeatedly that it would be crossing a red line. So it was doing everything deliberately and provocatively. So I can't say that NATO was idle and NATO was not provoking Russia.
Can I just get your response finally to the British Defence Secretary's statement today, Ben Wallace, who, talking about Victory Day, more or less said that today's Russian forces are dishonouring their grandfathers who fought the Nazis. And he said, and I quote in there, that what Russian forces are doing now in Ukraine is mirroring fascism.
Well, it's entirely up to his conscience to say such blasphemous things. I can only reply by saying that it's absolutely disastrous and shameless what UK is doing right now, forgetting everything what we were fighting about. And I will only give you one example. I will show you what appeared today at the official page of President Zelensky. Here, you can see it in Instagram. And this is an emblem. You see it right now. I will make it bigger. So that's the emblem. Do you know what it is? It's Totenkopf. It's an emblem of a German division, SS division in the Second World War. So he published on the Victory Day an emblem of a fighter of right sector with this emblem, saying that this is a symbol. No, don't interrupt me, sir, please. This is a symbol of fight against Nazism, as he sees it. This was deleted after half an hour, but of course we have a copy of this. And do you know that this Totenkopf division was responsible for murder of 100 Britons in France at the beginning of the Second World War? So it means that UK now is covering Ukrainian authorities which display Nazi symbols during the Victory Day. And these Nazi symbols were used by the same regiments that killed British people. Isn't that a little bit strange?
I'm only interrupting you because you've had your say, and we've run out of time, Mr. Polyanskiy. Thank you very much indeed to talk to you. And should just say that those images that were shown by Mr. Polyanskiy, well, we haven't been able to independently verify them. And you're watching Sky News, a special on the war in Ukraine. Coming up, I'll be talking to several people who have been following the conflict, including the former Prime Minister of Finland. Well, as we've already been hearing tonight, there were no new announcements from President Vladimir Putin at his Victory Day speech about the war in Ukraine, and it's left many people wondering what Vladimir Putin's next move in that war might be. Well, I'm joined now by Joseph Cirincione, national security expert and distinguished fellow at the Quincy Institute, and Kira Rudik, a Ukrainian member of parliament and leader of the opposition party, Golos Semin. Very good to talk to you. And if I could start with you first, Kira Rudik, because I'm sure, well, I hope you did hear my last interview with one of the Russian representatives to the United Nations, and explaining their point of view on President Putin's speech, that there were parallels between defeating Nazism back in 1945 and what they are doing now in Ukraine. Your response?
You know, I was very emotional when I was listening to what the previous speaker was saying. They're basically saying Ukraine was wearing lipstick. Ukraine was wearing a very short skirt. That's why we didn't have any other way to act other than attack and rape her. This is exactly what they were saying, and this is exactly what Russia is doing. And it could be funny that they are living in such a fairy tale world of propaganda if there was not another school that was bombarded recently in the east of Ukraine with around 40 children right now harmed by this attack. You see right now why all the peaceful negotiations or the talks, they are useless and they cannot lead to any conclusion. Because the position of Russia in it is completely out of this world. It is based on the total propaganda that they are right and that they had all the right to invade my country, that they had the right to attack and kill innocent people because they felt that there was a threat. They felt that NATO, which is an absolutely defensive organization, was planning to attack them. Another question is about pro-Ukrainian coup that happened in Ukraine. So can you imagine the imaginary world, a terrible world that they're living in, and they are acting and fighting on it? This is absolutely terrifying when you're thinking about it, that the soldiers that are coming to Ukraine, they're coming with the same narratives. We are coming here to liberate you from your democracy. We are coming here to fight NATO and kill NATO on your land. Did the school that they bombarded today had NATO soldiers in it? It's like, it's so unfair to my people and so crazy that Russia is acting this way. And it also shows you that no peaceful negotiations would ever be possible. The only way for us to end this terrifying situation, to end this war, is to win it and push them back to Russia, where they could do whatever they want, where they could suffer, where they could talk to each other about these imaginary things. So it's completely insane.
Well, thank you for setting the record straight. Joseph Cirincione, give us your analysis of President Putin's speech today in Red Square. Fairly short and precious little then about the situation in Ukraine in terms of the military operation, and certainly no indication of escalation.
Yes, I thought the speech was very revealing in what he didn't say. He didn't declare victory, nor did he formally declare war, which would have allowed him to conscript larger numbers of Russian men into this invading force. He doesn't appear to know what to do at this point. So what you heard was a repetition of his basic themes. They're fighting Nazism. This is a continuation of World War II. They're fighting the aggressors of NATO, etc. But without any plan for the future, anything that he could tell the people of what was going to happen next. And that's because Putin is in a bind. He is losing this war. His new offensive, after having lost the battle for Kyiv, his battle for Donbass is not going well. He's basically static on the front lines, or in some sectors on the retreat as the Ukrainian forces are pushing back. And I believe this is just going to get worse for Putin as the Western supplied, more advanced, heavy combat equipment comes into play, the artillery, the drones, the combat fighting vehicles, even new tanks come into Ukraine. I believe the Ukrainians are turning the force of this war against Putin, and he doesn't seem to have a plan for what to do. So that's why I thought his speech was so somber, so bombastic, but also so brief.
Yeah. Kira Ruddick, I saw you nodding along with that, and you touched on it in your first answer to me. Is this the only way this war ends? If and when Russia is pushed out of all Ukrainian lands? Because there were talks early on in the conflict which seemed to indicate that perhaps Crimea might be ceded to Russia, parts of the Donbass. Is that now off the table from the Ukrainian point of view? It's you get out of Ukraine altogether and then we can talk.
Yeah, I totally agree with this. Get out of Ukraine and then we can talk. I totally agree with James that the important point in Putin's speech was what he did not say, because he was talking again the propaganda statements, but he also did not say beforehand that he would attack Ukraine. He also did not say that he would attack Crimea, but he still did. So even though we know that Russians are losing right now, we need to beware and we need to continue on our plan. You know, here in Kyiv, we were very worried before the May 9th. We were expecting anything. We were expecting potential nuclear attack or the announcement of full-scale war or something else, but we knew that he could do anything. The important point is that we should not change our plan depending on what Putin is doing. And our plan is all the democratic countries are united around Ukraine. We are getting additional weapons every single day, and we need the most important weapons, the Air Force protection of our skies. We need the sanctions to be voted for and start working. We need to make sure that Russia does not find new markets for its oil. And we need to start working on the next step, which is embargo on Russian gas. With all that, Russia will be weakened out. We will be fighting as hell, and I can promise you that. We will be pushing them back, and we will make sure that there is no invader on our land. And then when Russia is weakened out, when they cannot continue their offense, we'll be living in the new democratic world where countries like Ukraine can develop and countries like Russia are pushed on the sides of the history.
Joseph Cirincione, what might, I saw you nodding along with that, what might that all mean, though? You know, a cornered, we've discussed this many times before, but a cornered President Putin, a pushed back President Putin. Now, we know what we saw in Red Square today, as well as all those military forces and personnel. We saw the ballistic missiles. We've heard the threat of nuclear action. Ill-defined at the moment, but we know what a mighty arsenal Russia has. Might he use them?
Yes, he might. And this is the great worry that we have. Kira, if I may call you that, I'm a fan of yours. I follow you on Twitter. And I saw that the other day you said any day there's not a nuclear attack in Ukraine is a good day. And I would have to agree with that. That is what you're worried about. Ironically, as Putin loses this war, the risk of nuclear escalation increases. That's because of the Russian doctrine of escalate to de-escalate. If they are losing a conventional war with the West, and they considered this a war with the West, there's a doctrine that says they would use a nuclear weapon to shock the West into retreat, to convince the West that they have to back off. So you have to be worried about that. I don't think it's likely, but it's possible. And that's why I appreciate the careful way that the Biden administration and the NATO leaders are aiding Ukraine. They're not being provocative. They're slowly increasing the level of their aid. They're not attacking Russia itself. They're not threatening Russia with regime change. They're trying to prevent Russia from doing anything hugely dangerous. And that means that in the end, and I may disagree with Kira here, you are going to have a negotiated solution to this war.
Okay, there's that.
A way out.
There's that. But Joseph, we are running out of time, so I just got to get this question in, though. But if Russia uses a nuclear weapon, and I know there are different ways and different sizes they could use, doesn't the United States, doesn't NATO have no other option then, if that happens, than to attack Russia with nuclear weapons? Because if they've done it once, the next time it might be heading for New York.
Yes, but here's the power of the NATO alliance. Our conventional weapons are so effective that we could conduct a very strong conventional attack against, for example, the airport or the facility that launched a nuclear attack against Ukraine itself without resorting to nuclear. And I believe the Biden administration and the NATO allies would first seek to try to resolve the crisis at that level without escalating it. If, of course, he uses a large nuclear weapon against a NATO target, then all bets are off.
OK, thank you both very, very much indeed. Really good talking to you both. Joseph Cirincione, Kira Ruddick, very good to see you.
Thank you.
I'm going to continue with some of those themes now, because speaking at another event today, the British Defence Secretary was asked about NATO membership for Finland and Sweden, who are not currently members. Both countries have been considering membership of the military alliance after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Asked whether their addition would be provocative to Russia, Ben Wallace said he didn't think so, saying that the expansion of NATO is just a consequence of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Well, I'm joined now by Professor Alexander Stubb, former Prime Minister of Finland and a director now at the European University Institute. Very good to talk to you, Professor Stubb. Well, let's talk about that. I mean, first of all, how close now is Finnish membership of NATO? We see that the population are very, very keen now on joining.
Yeah, definitely. The latest opinion poll came out today, and it had 76% of the population in favor and 12 against. And I guess you can compare that to our EU referendum in 1994, which was 57-43. Now, how imminent is this? Well, we expect our president, Sauli Niinistö, to announce on Thursday our intent to make the move. The official decision will take place on Sunday, and then we will basically file or show our intent to join NATO together with Sweden next week on Monday or Tuesday. So really historic days ahead.
Can it be quite a fast track, though? I mean, I'm thinking, how quickly then does Article 5 of NATO membership, that doctrine of an attack on one member is an attack on them all and there has to be a response, how quickly does that apply if you're in the waiting room, so to speak?
Well, I think ever since Putin attacked Ukraine on the 24th of February, the leadership of both countries have been doing a lot of shuttle diplomacy. You saw the president of Finland in Washington during the same week, and the Prime Minister of Sweden doing similar types of moves. So I think that we have security assurances, both implicit and explicit. And of course, Article 5, legally speaking, happens once you join. Now, I think Finland and Sweden will be fast-track members, so it just basically depends on how quickly the NATO member states, all 30 of them, will be able to ratify our application. I expect us to be members latest by the end of this year, probably a little bit earlier.
Wow, that really is fast-track. But then what about this issue of provocation? You heard the speech from President Putin in Red Square today, railing against NATO as it is already configured, talking about the proxy war in Ukraine, the direct threat to Russian territory. Isn't there a danger then that they do something preemptive in Finland before it gets formally into NATO?
Not really. I mean, you can never, of course, count it out, but we don't expect conventional intimidation, but we do expect hybrid, which basically means some form of cyber or information attacks. On the cyber side, when Zelensky was speaking at the Finnish parliament a few weeks back, the Russians attacked the homepage of our foreign ministry and defense ministry. At the same time, Russian aircraft violated Finnish airspace. On the information side, we'll see a lot of disinformation in Russia about Finland and Sweden, in Finland and Sweden about us, but probably more worryingly in the 30 NATO member states about the possible ramifications of us becoming members. But to be honest, I think it's a foregone conclusion. Putin and Russia knows that.
And can I ask you, because we've talked before about how well the Finnish and the Finnish leadership know the mind, or used to know the mind, certainly of President Putin and those links between your president and President Putin. Do you think Putin really believes that stuff about Nazism in Ukraine and, you know, pictures of death's head from the SS? I mean, that they're refighting the Second World War. Is that to mobilise the army, to keep morale up within Russia itself? Or does he really believe it? In which case, we've got a problem, haven't we?
Well, you know, you have to understand one thing, that in the Russian language, there are two words for truth. And one of them is the legendary pravda. And pravda actually means tactical truth. And that means that whoever you're talking to knows that you're lying, but because you're doing it for the common good, in this particular case, Russia, you sort of accept it. So, you know, I think there is an element of, yes, he believes it, but then the other element is also propaganda. But the problem, of course, here is that, you know, repetition is the mother of all knowledge. So the more often you repeat it, the more you start believing it yourself. And this whole narrative of denazification. And, you know, I've gotten it in messages from quite reliable Russian sources in the past few weeks. So the language is certainly out there, I'm afraid.
And just lastly, I mean, is diplomacy dead at the moment? We saw those talks, flurry of talks, various world leaders getting involved in the early stages of the war. Doesn't seem to be happening now. And as we heard from Ukraine, they say, right, the only way this ends is we eject the Russians from our territory.
Yeah, I think diplomacy at the moment is dormant. So if you compare this to the war in Georgia in 2008, I was Foreign Minister of Finland and chairman of the OSCE and brokered the ceasefire on the ground in Tbilisi and in Moscow in 5 days. This war is now into, I think it's 75th day. The Finnish winter war lasted 105 days. I'm afraid we're in this for the long haul because there's very, very little space for any form of a ceasefire because the two parties are so far apart, and understandably so.
Professor Stubb, always good to get your analysis. Thank you so much for joining us once again on Sky News Tonight. Alexander Stubb there, former Prime Minister of Finland. And that's nearly it for this special programme on the war in Ukraine. But we're going to leave you with a positive story, yes, from Ukraine, a rarity, of course, among all the brutality and tragedy. Mark Austin has been to tell the story of an animal shelter caught up in the fighting north of Kiev in Hostomel.
When the war came to Hostomel, it was intense and brutal and grim, and many people died. Most of those who could fled the horror unleashed by the Russians here, but Max Skripnik was not one of them. Because in his words, he had 600 lives to protect, the dogs he cares for at the shelter he runs here. He wanted to make sure they were watered and fed and not abandoned, so he stayed, even as the shells came in.
So Max, this shell landed while you were here, and you were right in the middle of a battle then.
Yes, we even have a chance to see and to even calculate how many missiles was on the air from different sides. And we even saw these missiles, and it was not dozens, it was hundreds of missiles per day.
He stayed for much of the Russian occupation of this village. The shelter owner, Asya Sapinska, stayed through all of it.
The Ukrainian people fulfill their everyday job, and our everyday job to provide a good life for our animals. And I hope that we did this job.
So frightened were the dogs during the height of the raging battles, they dug their own holes to escape down when the noise was too much. Some of his animals died.
The dogs here died from the bombardment, or from the heartbreak.
How many died?
We continue to find the died animals, continue to find.
He's found a use for the ammunition boxes left by the Russian occupiers, who he persuaded to allow food and a generator to be brought in to keep the place going. One 6-week-old puppy was born during the fighting here.
The dogs of the war.
she survived.
Max's priority now is to find homes for puppies like this and reunite other dogs with owners who fled. In the midst of war, these are people risking their lives to protect animals in need. It is their duty, they say, and no one will persuade them otherwise. Mark Austin, Sky News, Hostomel.
And that is it for this War in Ukraine special. Coming up in the next hour, the latest on Her Majesty the Queen, who will not attend the state opening of Parliament.